We plan our careers, we plan where we'll live, we plan how we'll spend retirement. Some people even make plans for the kind of life they'll want 20 years from now. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, planning is one of the reasons societies move forward, but every plan shares one quiet limitation. It is built using only what we know today, and none of us has ever lived tomorrow. The future has always been an unanswered question. 20 years ago, if someone had told Americans that a New York real estate businessman would become one of the country's most recognizable television personalities and later become President of the United States, many people would have laughed, not because it was impossible, but because it didn't fit the future they imagined. Yet that's exactly what happened to Donald Trump. Whether people admire him or disagree with him isn't the point. The point is much simpler. Life has a way of changing direction before anyone sees the turn ahead. Brad Pitt tells a different story. Before Hollywood, before the awards, before millions of people around the world knew his name, he moved furniture, he drove people around, he even stood outside a restaurant wearing a giant chicken costume just to attract customers. Imagine walking past him that afternoon and saying, "One day, you'll become one of the biggest movie stars in the world." It would have sounded unbelievable, maybe even to him, because life's biggest turning points rarely announce themselves. They often hide inside completely ordinary days. And that's what makes this so interesting. When we look at other people's lives, it's easy to see how unpredictable their journeys were. But when we look at our own, we quietly believe our plans will unfold just as we expect, not because we're careless, not because we're wrong, but because every long-term plan is created by the person we are today. It cannot include the people we haven't met, the conversations we haven't had, or the experiences that haven't changed us yet. Perhaps that's why so many lives don't follow the script that was written years before. They become something else, something unexpected, and sometimes something even better. If that's true, then perhaps the real question isn't whether our plans are right or wrong. The real question is something much simpler. Will the future version of ourselves want the same things we want today? At first, the answer seems obvious. Of course, who knows us better than ourselves? We know what makes us happy. We know what we value. We know the kind of life we want to build. At least, that's what we believe. Psychologists have spent years studying something called the end of history illusion. The idea is surprisingly simple. Most people can easily see how much they've changed over the last 10 years. They laugh at old photos. They smile at opinions they no longer hold. They remember dreams that no longer matter. Yet, when asked about the next 10 years, many believe the biggest changes are already behind them. In other words, we recognize our past changes but consistently underestimate our future ones. It's one of the quiet contradictions of being human, and once you understand that, certain stories begin to look very different. Take George Clooney. For years, he wasn't simply unmarried, he became known as one of Hollywood's most famous bachelors. He openly spoke about not seeing marriage in his future. Those weren't careless comments. At that moment, they reflected exactly how he felt. Many people probably thought, he's made up his mind. Perhaps he thought so too. Then life introduced someone he had never planned for, Amal Alamuddin, a human rights lawyer. They married. Later, they became parents. The remarkable part isn't that George Clooney changed. The remarkable part is that years earlier, he couldn't imagine wanting anything different, and once you notice that pattern, you begin to see it everywhere. Cameron Diaz built an extraordinary career. She often spoke about being comfortable with her independence. Marriage didn't seem necessary. She wasn't waiting for someone to complete her life. Then she met Benji Madden. She married. Later, she embraced motherhood. Again, the lesson isn't that marriage is better. The lesson is that the future introduced a person who wasn't part of today's plan. Perhaps that's the biggest limitation of every long-term plan. It can only include the people we've already met, the experiences we've already lived, and the priorities we have today. It cannot include the stranger who becomes family, the opportunity that changes a career, or the unexpected season of life that quietly changes us. Think about your own life. 5 years ago, what seemed impossible? Maybe a job you never imagined taking. Maybe a city you never imagined living in. Maybe a hobby you once dismissed. Maybe a friendship that became one of the most important relationships in your life. At the time, none of those things were part of the plan, and yet, today, they're part of your story. Perhaps we don't make plans because we know the future. We make plans using the only version of ourselves we know today, and that's not a flaw. It's simply being human. There's another strange habit many of us share. We spend years asking, what kind of life do I want? But we rarely ask, what kind of person will I become? Those are not the same question. At 25, it's easy to believe we know ourselves. We know what we enjoy, what we don't, who we need, who we don't. So we make quiet promises to ourselves. I'll always value freedom. I'll never want children. I'll never leave this city. I'll be happier on my own. None of those statements are unreasonable. They're simply written by someone who has only lived 25 years. The problem isn't that we're wrong. The problem is that life keeps introducing experiences we haven't had yet, and experiences have a way of changing priorities without asking permission. Maybe that's why some of the biggest changes in our lives don't begin with an answer. They begin with a question we never expected to ask. One woman spent years believing she enjoyed being alone, and she did, until her father became seriously ill. For weeks, she sat in hospital waiting rooms. One evening, she noticed an elderly couple nearby. They barely spoke. The husband simply reached over and held his wife's hand. Nothing dramatic happened. No speech, no tears. Just two people waiting together. Driving home, one thought stayed with her. If one day that's me, who will be sitting beside me? She didn't change that night. But something else did. For the first time, her future no longer looked exactly the way she had planned it. And perhaps that's how life changes most of us. Not through arguments, not through advice, not because someone tells us we're wrong, but because one ordinary moment introduces a question our younger selves never had to answer. We often think we're planning the rest of our lives. Maybe we're only planning the next chapter. Because the person we'll be at 50 hasn't lived through 40 yet. The person we'll be at 70 is still learning lessons the person we are today cannot possibly understand, and maybe that's why the future remains one of life's greatest mysteries. Not because we don't know what's coming, but because we don't yet know who we'll be when it arrives. And that's the part we rarely think about. We assume we're planning our future. In reality, we're planning it with today's version of ourselves. The person making those promises has never lived the years ahead, has never experienced the losses, the friendships, the responsibilities, or the unexpected moments that quietly rearrange what matters. Think about your own life. 10 years ago, what did you believe would make you happy? For many people, the answer has changed. Not because they lacked direction, but because life kept teaching lessons that no plan could anticipate. When older Americans talk about their biggest regrets, they rarely say, "I wish I had predicted my future better." More often they say, "I didn't realize how fast the years would pass," or "I thought there would always be more time." The regret isn't failing to control life. It's failing to notice it while it was happening. Life rarely changes in one dramatic moment. It changes through ordinary days. A conversation you almost skipped. A phone call you almost ignored. A person who meant nothing at first, but years later, becomes part of the story you can't imagine living without. Looking ahead, these moments seem ordinary. Looking back, they become the moments that changed everything. We spend so much time planning the life we'll have that we rarely stop to consider the person who will be living it. And the greatest unknown in our future may not be what will happen to us, but who we will become when it does. We spend so much of our lives trying to write tomorrow. But tomorrow has always written a few pages of its own. Some plans will work, some won't. Some dreams will disappear, only to make room for better ones we never imagined. The future isn't uncertain because life is unpredictable. It's uncertain because we're still becoming the people who will live it. So perhaps the goal isn't to have the perfect plan. It's to remain open to the unexpected turns that make a life worth remembering. Life unscripted. We may not know what tomorrow brings, but we can choose to live well today.